Carol, I must go to you first because you are the one who wrote about these late night calls between Donald Trump and Roger Stone. Do we know if Mueller knows what these calls were about or just that they happened?
We don't know everything that Mueller knows, Stephanie. I'm sorry to say. I wish we did. But clearly what we know now as a result of this draft, I would call it a draft indictment, but it's really a draft plea agreement. What we know is that Mueller believes that this call is critical, or these series of calls between Corsi emailing Roger Stone in August, early August, about hey, WikiLeaks is going to be dumping some very damaging information, probably in October. Pretty amazing for Jerome Corsi to know that on August 2nd. And Mueller is focusing on what happens next. August 3rd, according to Roger Stone, he has a phone conversation with then candidate Trump. And not many days later, then candidate Trump makes an announcement about some very unflattering things that are going to be coming out about Hillary. It's just a really strange set of circumstances. Could Mueller know exactly what they discussed? I doubt it, unless Stone told someone else, or or Trump told someone else right after those phone calls.
My goodness. All right, Glenn, how significant is WikiLeaks in terms of the overall investigation? If there is a conspiracy, is this the most likely place for it to come from?
I think it's one of the likely places, Steph. WikiLeaks is certainly important and arguably central to the Mueller investigation in their attempts to see if there was a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia. But let's not forget, the Trump Tower meeting is another area that is ripe for potential conspiratorial conduct between the folks who were in that meeting and the Russians who attended that meeting. And as we know, the folks from the campaign included Manafort and Kushner and Don Jr. So I think that is a separate area. It is not obviously related to WikiLeaks, but, you know, perhaps most importantly, Steph, is that how many times have we heard it's not the crime, but it's the cover up? And boy, there sure looks like there is strong evidence that there is a conspiracy to cover this up, which would also be a conspiracy to obstruct justice. So I think there are multiple conspiracies in play here.
It sure looks like that, but then you look at a lot of senior members of the GOP who remain silent on all of this. Matt, Roger Stone says you would need tapes to prove that he did anything wrong. Is he right? What would it take to convince the public and Congress here?
What a weird thing to say. Think about that. Yeah, nothing's going to happen unless there's tapes of this. There might. Right. You don't really say that, do you? You don't volunteer that bit of information. It's important to note in all of this that most of the reporting that we've seen has said that Robert Mueller is not going to bring charges against a sitting president. That likely he's going to come up with a report. So, and then it's up to Congress. So that makes a lot of these questions about and judgments about the behavior less criminal and more political. And in that context, Donald Trump right now is flailing, right? He's tweeted about this 9 times, 10 times in the last 3 days. And look at his storylines. It's like, they spent $30 million. It's now $40 million. They spent
over the course of in the last day.
Yes,
yesterday he said it was $30 million. Today, the fact that Robert Mueller dropped $10 million on this, please.
And don't sleep on, he said to the New York Post in an interview, like, I have these FISA documents that I could unseal that are really going to hurt the Democrats, but I'm just waiting in case they go after me. That doesn't make any sense. You would have unsealed those along. Are you saying that you're abetting a cover-up?
But hold on. It doesn't make any sense except for the fact that there are people around the country who do not challenge the person who's in the Oval Office, and they believe it. So Roger Stone may be correct in that unless you have tapes with my voice, this don't matter.
But it does matter in this sense. By having people, by throwing everything against the wall forever for the last 12 months on this stuff, and having the House Republicans go follow him down that road, it's made them less credible and made them less electable. So now Democrats run the House, and now President Trump does not have a consistent, believable storyline about the Mueller investigation. He's just saying McCarthyism and Hillary Clinton and maybe Fusion GPS. He doesn't have a consistent story.
And he's creating more and more and more chaos, which only confuses people at home and actually gets them to tune out. Eddie, why should this matter to the average person at home? My mother, your mother, They don't know who Jerome Corsi and if I held up a picture of Jerome Corsi, my mom would say, I don't know, he was the guy in line ahead of me at the deli at ShopRite. I mean, why should they matter to your average voter?
Right. You're absolutely right about the details, but it would matter if it turns out that Donald Trump stole the election, that he conspired with the Russians to undermine our democracy. So even my mother, retired woman on the coast of Mississippi, right, who is losing faith in the very base, in the very institutions of democracy, right, if she finds out that the person who is supposedly the leader of the free world colluded with Russia to undermine our democracy, it would matter to her. It would matter to her because it has implications for our everyday life. It has implications for the country in general. And I think this is important because people aren't just selfish. They're not just preoccupied with their own self-interest. At least I want to believe that they care about the country broadly.
Okay, but then, Carol, like, is the future of our democracy hanging on these two dudes? I mean, let's talk about who they are. Corsi, this guy is a known conspiracy theorist, and at best, Roger Stone, a political trickster. Neither of them are credible.
So you raised the excellent point in your last question and in this one. Like, why is everything hanging on a series of people who have given very inconsistent, and that's charitable, statements about what's happened? And also, to your point, most Americans have no idea who these people are. However, what's important, in August, there is an email from Jerome Corsi, a professor you probably don't know and couldn't recognize on the street, who basically heralds that WikiLeaks is going to dump something. There's something many people don't recognize about that email, which we reported on yesterday for the first time. What people don't recognize is he references that this is what the hackers are up to now. This is the hackers' game now. The president has said repeatedly, hey, look, we didn't know Russia was trying to help us, except for that email that says this is part of the Russian government's effort to help you, the email to his son, Don Jr. And in this one, again, in Jerome Corsi's email, there is this reference to the hackers. The president has said we didn't know Russia was trying to get these emails and giving them to WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks was using basically the fruits of a crime to interfere in election. That's funny because Jerome Corsi seemed to know that on August 2nd, days before candidate Trump basically telegraphed to all of his supporters, this is what's happening. I think, your panel is so right that these little bit players, who cares? But the larger issue is, did this campaign know Russia was trying to help? Is that why the president currently is so friendly to Vladimir Putin when everyone else is in recoil at some of his actions?
All right, Glenn, I want to talk about what is distressing me, these joint defense agreements. You wrote about Manafort sharing information with Trump. Corsi said he's been doing the same thing. To me, somebody who has no background in law, that sounds insane. How can Mueller clearly build a case, assuming every single thing he is discussing with these people is going straight back to the president, who's then poisoning the well via Twitter?
Well, first of all, Mueller can and will build a case. He has done that with respect to everybody he's charged, and he's going to do that with respect to all of the remaining grifters that need to be swept up in this, like Corsi and Stone. But to your point, Steph, about joint defense agreements, I've never seen anything like this. When you have two people, you have the president and you have Manafort entering into this information sharing agreement. And then once Manafort pleads guilty, and we all believed flipped, they keep the agreement in place. Now, mind you, that's not unethical. It's really problematic. But we can see that the reason Manafort did it is because he's trying to keep one foot in the Mueller camp, one foot in the I hope President Trump will pardon me camp. And I happen to think it's all going to blow up on Manafort and perhaps ultimately the president. Why? Because, look, Manafort has reported.
Why do you think it doesn't blow up on Mueller? I mean, this is stunning to me that all of these guys are allowed to talk to one another. And that does, you're saying, I've never seen this before. To me, this almost looks like Trump and that whole squad is outfoxing them.
To be clear, I don't think this is helpful to Mueller, particularly if in all of those interviews with Manafort gave Mueller information that Mueller would really like to use in court. Mueller probably lost the opportunity to use it in court, at least through the testimony of Manafort.
Why would this be allowed?
Well, it's allowed. Here's why it's allowed. It's unusual, but it's allowed. Manafort's lawyers are there to do the best job they can for Manafort. They apparently concluded that the best job they could do was to keep both of their options open because, look, he was already sunk in connection with being convicted in Virginia, facing another trial in which he was surely going to be convicted in D.C. So his lawyers decided they're going to keep this information sharing agreement in place so that he can still go back to the president hoping for a pardon.
And that may be working, Matt. All of a sudden, Manafort is back in the news in the last 24 hours. His plea deal looks like it's getting blown up by Mueller because he lied. And what does the president do? As I'm flipping through page 6, reading New York Gossip yesterday, President of the United States does an interview with the New York Post and throws out there, a pardon might not be off the table. Isn't that exactly what Manafort wants?
Yes, of course. And not just Manafort, Jerome Corsi. Jerome Corsi was on Ari Melber's show last night. What the hell is he even doing? So they're all advertising, please pardon me, right now. Here's the thing about all of that. Two aspects. One is that that communication between Manafort's legal team and Trump's legal team after he had supposedly flipped towards Mueller, that stuff is not protected by attorney-client privilege. So if Mueller wants to go after that communication, he can, but then it's going to be a question of, will Whitaker let him go that far? That's an open question that we're going to be fighting. The second thing about all of this is that tomorrow we're going to see a lot more of what Mueller has because Manafort's going to, in front of a judge, where his legal team is, to get sentenced. There's going to be a sentencing memo. He's going to have to spell out why we know he lied. So if we're worried, if anyone's worried about that Mueller investigation is somehow going to be suppressed by Whitaker or by whoever, we're going to see some of the Mueller investigation, I believe, tomorrow.
The other ethics question, of course, hanging out there regarding Whitaker. Over 2 weeks ago, he was to have conversations with ethics attorneys about his potential conflicts of interest. Yet thus far, the Department of Justice hasn't answered a single question about that. All right, Eddie, quickly fact check for me. The president in the last 24 hours keeps making this comparison to McCarthy. I would love for someone to say back to him, explain to me, sir, exactly how and why, because I bet he doesn't even know. Walk me through why this comparison makes no sense.
It makes no sense because, in fact, it's a classic case of Freudian projection. If you think about what Trump has been doing, he
doesn't talk much about Freudian projection.
Yeah. but you think about what he's been doing. He's been claiming about what he claims about the deep state, who's infiltrated the deep state, and what they're doing. So when Joseph McCarthy, the Wisconsin senator in the 1950s, makes his claim about communism and its influence on the country, he's actually directing it towards the State Department. He's looking at how the communists have infiltrated the armies and the army and the like. He's claiming in some ways that the deep state has been compromised by communists in interesting sorts of ways. And then he goes on his witch hunt, turning citizen against citizen, creating this broad culture of suspicion that leads to Rosenberg's being executed, that leads to Alger Hiss and all those folks being accused, leads to folk in Hollywood being accused, lead to folk turning on folk, lead to folk becoming neocons, leads to all of this stuff where democracy is literally thrown into the trash bin. And then I'm thinking about this one moment when Joseph McCarthy in June of 1954 accuses a lawyer who's defending the army. He says, you have communist ties, and Joseph Welch says to him, have you no sense of decency? It seems to me the way we should respond to this tweet to Donald Trump is, have you no sense of decency and shame? Because you damn sure don't know anything about history.
Well, I'm sorry to the rest of my panel. I'm sure I had a lot more questions, but after that, we're going to have to drop the mic.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.